I now give the floor to Mr. Philippe Lazzarini, Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, to brief the membership.
Mr. President, Excellencies, I am addressing you at UNRWA's darkest hour. The Israeli Knesset legislative action poses an imminent and existential threat to the agency. It is the latest move in a relentless campaign to delegitimize UNRWA and undermine its role, providing development services and emergency assistance to Palestine refugees. Since the beginning of the war in Gaza, Israeli officials have described dismantling UNRWA as a war goal. The Knesset legislation serves this objective. However, its intention goes beyond undermining UNRWA and the United Nations. It seeks to end Palestinians' right to self-determination and aspiration for a just political solution. It advances effort to shift unilaterally long-established parameters for resolving the Israel-Palestine conflict. Mr. President, a year of the most intense bombardment of a civilian population since World War II and the severe restriction of humanitarian aid have transformed Gaza into a dystopian horror. More than 43,000 people are reported killed, most of them women and children. Thousands more lie unaccounted for under the rubble. Nearly the entire population is displaced. Hostages taken from Israel remain in prolonged and terrifying captivity. In northern Gaza, Palestinians are being burned and buried alive by airstrike. A brutal siege and attacks on hospitals and rescue teams are denying life-saving supplies and assistance to the population. Men and boys are being arrested and reportedly detained in undisclosed locations. The action of Israeli forces and pervasive insecurity are rendering the humanitarian response untenable. Meanwhile, the occupied West Bank is gripped by escalating conflict. Settler violence and military incursions are a daily occurrence. Public infrastructure is destroyed deliberately, inflicting collective punishment on Palestinians. The economy is on the verge of collapse. Layered onto this unspeakable suffering is the threat of UNRWA's operation ending. Excellencies, UNRWA is a mechanism through which this Assembly has tasked the United Nations to assist Palestinian refugees. Unique among UN agencies, UNRWA is mandated to directly provide public-like services, including education for more than 500,000 children, primary health care, and social support. UNRWA services primarily concern human development. However, our large footprint and long experience have enabled us to transform rapidly into a humanitarian machine in Gaza. Our teachers became shelter managers overnight. Our health clinics were transformed into emergency rooms. Our health teams were critical to rolling out the emergency polio vaccination campaign. For the past year, UNRWA has been a lifeline for the people of Gaza. It is the only pillar of their lives left standing. Mr. President, the Knesset legislation forbids contact between Israeli state officials and UNRWA representatives. It prohibits UNRWA operation in what it calls the sovereign territory of the State of Israel. its implementation will have disastrous consequences. In Gaza, dismantling UNRWA will collapse the United Nations humanitarian response, which relies heavily on the agency's infrastructure. Glaringly absent from discussion about Gaza without UNRWA is education. The agency has been providing education to generations of Palestinian refugees, many of whom have achieved remarkable success in the region and around the world. Countless alumni have told me about the pivotal role that an UNRWA education has played in their lives. An education that champions human rights and gender equality and promotes tolerance and respect for cultural identity. Palestinians value education highly. It is the only asset from which they have not, until now, been dispossessed. In the absence of a capable public administration or state, only UNRWA can deliver education to more than 650,000 girls and boys in Gaza. In the absence of UNRWA, an entire generation will be denied the right to education. Their future will be sacrificed, sowing the seeds for marginalization and extremism. In the West Bank, UNRWA's collapse would deprive at least 50,000 children of education and hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees of health care. The agency is the second largest employer after the Palestinian Authority and represents an estimated 5 to 8% of the GDP. Dismantling UNRWA will not terminate the refugee status of Palestinians. This status exists independently of the agency, but it will severely harm their lives and future. Excellencies, for decades, UNRWA has provided Palestinian refugees with services ensuring their access to basic rights. Despite this, and perhaps because of it, we have paid a heavy price. The agency is under intense attack in Gaza. At least 239 UNRWA personnel have been killed. Others have been detained and reported being tortured. More than 2/3 of UNRWA premises have been damaged or destroyed. Palestinian armed groups, including Hamas and Israeli forces, have allegedly used our premises for military purposes. In occupied East Jerusalem, our headquarters was set on fire. Local authorities are attempting to evict us from these premises to build settlement. I continue to call for accountability for the attacks on UN personnel, premises, and operation for an independent investigation into this violation. Mr. President, UNRWA takes allegations of neutrality breaches extremely seriously. We do not operate in a zero-risk environment, but we take a zero-tolerance approach to any proven breaches. It is problematic, however, that unsubstantiated allegations are used to justify actions against the agency. The independent review of UNRWA's neutrality found that the agency has a more robust neutrality framework than comparable entities. We are making every effort to implement the recommendation of the review. I must emphasize that UNRWA, like comparable UN entities, does not have police, military, or intelligence capabilities. We rely on member states when such capacities are needed. For over 15 years, UNRWA has shared annually the names of its staff with the government of Israel. We now share these names on a quarterly basis. This includes the names of staff about whom the government never previously raised concerns, but now include in lists alleging armed militancy. We have repeatedly asked the government of Israel for evidence and proposed how sensitive evidence might be shared. No response has been received. UNRWA is therefore in the invidious position of being unable to address allegations for which it has no evidence, while these allegations continue to be used to undermine the agency. Excellencies, today millions of Palestinian refugees fear that the public services on which their lives depend will soon disappear. They fear that their children will be deprived of education, that illnesses will go untreated, and that social support will stop. 17,000 UNRWA personnel in the occupied Palestinian territory fear that they will lose their employment. The entire population of Gaza fears that their only remaining lifeline will be cut. Without intervention by member states, UNRWA will collapse, plunging millions of Palestinians into chaos. I have 3 urgent requests to prevent this devastating outcome. First, I ask that member states act to prevent the implementation of the legislation against UNRWA. Changes to UNRWA's mandate are the prerogative of the General Assembly, not individual member states. Second, I ask that member states ensure that any plan for a political transition delineates UNRWA's role. The agency must progressively conclude its mandate within the framework of a political solution and hand over its services to an empowered Palestinian administration. Finally, I ask that member states maintain funding to UNRWA and do not withhold or divert funds on the assumption that the agency can no longer operate. The cost of providing critical services, including education and healthcare, during a transition will be immense. I must also alert member states that abruptly dismantling the agency will cost more than $500 million in staff separation indemnities alone. Mr. President, the future of Palestinian refugees is a shared responsibility. My staff has given far more than we have any right to expect of them to deliver UNRWA's mandate. They have worked for 13 months without pause, amid immense personal hardship and loss. Thanks to them, Gaza has survived until now. Today, I'm asking member states to act in defense of Palestinian refugees and of UNRWA. To do so is to defend the United Nations, which lies at the heart of our multilateral system. It is to defend our collective future, which is today in the greatest jeopardy. Thank you.
I thank the Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East.